Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. I'm Paul Elam with A Voice for Men, and welcome to Going Mental with myself and Dr. Tara Palmatier from Strength for Men. You want to say hi to everybody, Dr. T?
Hello, everybody.
Always good to be here. Today we're going to be talking about psychotherapy in a way, in particular one area, and that is to do with the treatment of borderline personality disorder or other characterological disorders. And there's no better source to explain what this means, and we're not going to get into too much detail because it's boring, repetitious, and generally not as useful as you might think it would be. But I would like to start with Dr. T explaining to us what characterological disorders mean and what specifically is a borderline personality disorder.
Sure. Well, first, a personality disorder is not a mental illness in the way that schizophrenia or bipolar disorder or depression is a mental disorder. I view them as characterological disorders, which means the person typically isn't delusional or can't control themselves. What it means is that the individual who is disordered has a lifelong pervasive pattern of maladaptive behaviors, beliefs, and an internal experience that doesn't necessarily always match what's happening in objective reality. They are oftentimes the cause of their own problems, while they have as I said, a lifelong pattern of blaming others for the problems in their lives, even when it's pretty evident to anybody who's paying attention that these individuals are the architects of their own misery. Borderline personality disorder is on the cluster B spectrum, which is also referred to as the dramatic personality, the group of dramatic personality disorders, along with narcissistic personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, and antisocial personality disorder. Now, in my position is that at the heart of those cluster B disorders is sociopathy, and they're on a continuum. Other psychologists will disagree with me because the DSM states that if an individual is engaging in sociopathic behaviors, but it's attributed to another mental disorder such as BPD, borderline personality disorder, or narcissistic personality disorder, then it can't technically be considered sociopathic, even though the behavior is sociopathic, which to me seems kind of ridiculous because sociopathy is sociopathy, whatever the cause is. In borderline personality disorders specifically, there are 9 criteria in the DSM, which is the manual that psychiatrists and psychologists and social workers use to classify mental illnesses and disorders and diagnose them. There are 9 criteria. An individual only has to meet, I believe, is it 5 or 6? I think it's 5. 5 out of the 9 criteria to be diagnosed with BPD. And you know, there's a lot of variation. Not all individuals who have the disorder look the same, act the same, but there are many commonalities. And to me, the most common ones are emotional instability, chaotic interpersonal relationships, emotional lability, which means mood swings, but it's not attributed to, say, bipolar disorder, in which a person swings between depression and mania. As a commenter, Peter Wright, pointed out on the A Voice for Men page for this hangout, the borderline will often swing between intense love or hate, or in shrink speak, intense valuation and devaluation. These individuals often have what can be described as Jekyll and Hyde personalities. Many self-identified borderlines will claim that the problem is that they don't have empathy, it's that they have too much empathy. Although when you look at their behaviors towards their loved ones, it certainly doesn't seem that way.
I'm sorry, all I can think of is me love you too much.
I care too much. That's my biggest That's my biggest problem. Was that what Hillary Clinton said? In the last, when she was running the primary, that was it. I care too much. That's my problem.
Well, she got it from her husband, who feels your pain.
That wasn't all he was feeling.
Going off topic here.
Going off topic. Well, I do think Hillary is a raging narcissist, but we don't need to go there. And I do think Bill Clinton's mom might have been a BPD, but we don't need to go there either.
Let me ask briefly here, when we're talking about characterological disorders, I mean, that is more sort of psychobabblish type terminology. What we really mean is a person of bad character, isn't it? That we're just talking about, for lack of a better word, an asshole.
Yes.
And so we come up with something like characterological disorder in order to not say that this person is an asshole, because unfortunately you can't claim asshole on your insurance reimbursements as a mental health professional, but you can claim for disorders that are listed in the DSM. So that's basically what we have there. And if you would go on,
I
lost my.
Sure. Well, I do want to put a disclaimer out there. All individuals with personality disorders, I believe statistics now from the CDC and NIMH, the National Institute for Mental Health, put the prevalence of borderline personality disorder at something like maybe 4% and 10% for all personality disorders in the general population. But the issue is that this disorder are not diagnosed. They fly under the radar. They don't see themselves as having problems, or even if they do think they have problems, because they're often consumed by intense shame, I believe that the figure is much higher. I would put the percentage of disordered individuals in the general population at about 20%, and it is growing. For reasons we're not going to get into, but instability in early childhood. I don't want to get too much into the causes of this behavior. It used to be believed it was caused by intense physical and emotional neglect and/or child abuse and sexual abuse. But I think more often than not, it is an attachment disorder. With the individual has an unstable or chaotic or non-existent attachment in early life to a parental figure. And look, I know I don't want to say all of them are hopeless. I think there are individuals who have this disorder who acknowledge it and who do make a serious effort and commitment to getting well. It is not easy. It can take years. They can, if they are committed to it and acknowledge their issues with the help of a skilled clinician. They can learn impulse control, reality testing, how to stabilize them to spiral out of control. But I think, generally speaking, the prognosis is not good. And in my experience, many of the individuals who have been diagnosed with these issues, that is, if you can even get them an accurate diagnosis, just will not commit to doing the work. So I have, have I explained that adequately enough? I don't want to make this into a lecture about what the disorder is. Paul?
I think so, absolutely. I would suggest that anybody that wants more information on borderline personality disorder to Google it and read up on it. In the end, for me, the diagnostic part is not what is near as important to the people being affected by these people, and I've often seen people get in a trap of thinking that there's some sort of answer. If you can figure out something and put a label on it, that means there's something you can do with it. That does not tend to be the case when dealing with borderline personality disorder, and I know, yes, there are people that are borderline that are going to be upset by hearing that, but the fact of the matter is the prognosis is not good on them. This is a predominantly female type trait. You found most of the incidents, although there are
Oh,
male borderlines for sure.
honestly, my speculation is that if we were to actually get accurate diagnostics, I think a lot of male borderlines are misdiagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. I have long believed that BPD is the diagnostic female diagnostic equivalent of antisocial personality disorder in males.
Okay, fair.
And that's my opinion. That's my personal opinion. I can't back that up, so I want to be really clear about that. Can I post a comment?
Sure.
Okay. Do I use the eye, right? The eye icon.
The eye and hit the pin if you have it available too, and it'll stay up while we talk.
Okay. Okay. The reason I am posting this comment by Nicholas Goroff. Oh shoot. Okay. Yes, I did post the right one. Would Munchausen by proxy be a common trait in those suffering from BPD? Yes, it could be. I just want to briefly touch upon, and why we're discussing this today is that BPD is usually not the only issue a person has. It is often comorbid with substance abuse. And comorbid means the person, in addition to one diagnosis, has others that seem to travel together with it. So eating disorders, substance abuse, research for individuals who make false allegations of abuse and violence and sexual abuse are often made by borderline personality disordered individuals, as well as individuals with histrionic PD, narcissistic PD, paranoid PD, dependent personality PD, which technically isn't the diagnosis in the DSM anymore, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that the feminists in the APA successfully lobbied to have it removed because they believe it was stigmatizing to women. It's often implicated in child abuse. So this is a really, really serious disorder because of all of the other things that can often be associated with it.
And speaking of treatment for this order, this is why we wanted to have this discussion. So now let's move away from all the diagnostic stuff. I mean, folks, if somebody gets mad because they didn't like the flowers you got them and drags a key down the side of your car, you don't need a diagnosis to tell you to get the hell out and to move on. If you do, you got a bigger problem than the person who keyed your car. So let's move past that now. But where this does get really interesting to me, and it's something that you and I have both witnessed and we're both very familiar with, is that in the treatment industry, as it were, there is a definite, it's like this, there is a tendency, and more than a tendency, it's a predominant trait of most mental health professionals now. And you see it not only in their literature and you see it in their practices, but you also see it, as we talked about in the description for this hangout, you see it in the online communities for those who are seeking support, who are dealing with people with borderline personalities. There is a tendency to send the message that they need to try to understand the pain and feelings of the person who is abusing them rather than pay attention to the fact that they're being abused and that they need to protect themselves from it. This is a tremendous problem when actually the whole purpose of the mental health industry and of providing mental health services to people is to help them improve their lives. I mean, without that as a cause, there's not much point in mental health professionals being there. But what we have right now is a whole lot of mental health professionals who are very, very enabling of those with borderline personality disorder and very, very abusive, I think, with their family members, their loved ones, the people connected to them that are being abused, by reinforcing the message to them that they somehow need to just take this abuse, to look the other way, and to instead empathize with the struggle and the pain of the borderline. And that
who is their abuser.
Yes, who's their abuser? And I watched that happen, and it got a lot worse. I was in the mental health field during an interesting time when we went from practicing mental health services to practicing feminism. Um, and as the more the mental health community became more feminist, the more enabling of borderline personalities and the more less supportive of the victims of borderlines it became. And now I think it's an absolute mess. Tara, what were
Well,
your experiences with that?
well, I was in school, in grad school while that was happening, and at the same time, starting I think in the late '80s through the '90s. I don't know if this is still going on now because I don't hang out in academic circles for many reasons. Um, there was a real push in psychology programs, grad school programs, to start enrolling consumers of mental health services into the field of psychology as practitioners. And that includes individuals with BPD. I had a classmate who had scar marks up and down her arms. My program took her money for 2 years and then kicked her out as soon as she had emotional difficulties. I don't blame her for that. I blame the program, and you can bet they didn't refund her money. Um, Also, I think that the field of psychology attracts a fair number of people, whether or not they have a diagnosis, who go into the field because they have pretty severe issues that they're trying to understand and figure out. And then once the mental health field became feminized, and by that I mean beginning to incorporate more and more of feminist doctrine, which I believe feminism as a brand or an ideology, whatever it has become today, panders to personality disordered women, right? Women as victim, women as oppressed, even when they're the ones abusing their kids in greater numbers, as entitled to special treatment. I think it sort of became a perfect storm in the field of psychology. Also, the field is now predominantly inhabited by female practitioners, again, who may have their own issues. And I think their own biases get in the way, that if they hear a woman is behaving irrationally and acting out and abusing her boyfriend or her husband, well, she must have good reasons for doing that. And she might, like she has serious issues, or she grew up in an abusive family, but instead of addressing those issues and saying this absolutely is not okay and you need to stop it, they justify it, rationalize it, and then tell the male abuse victims, well, you just need to be more understanding of her, when I would be willing to bet anything they would not say the same if the genders were reversed. They would not.
Another part of the problem, I mean, that is the sort of the bias has always been there and predates feminism, in that people in general, not to mention just mental health professionals, but people in general tend to side with women's pain and find excuses and enable women in those situations. And therapists are certainly no exceptions, and today they're the rule at doing that. But part of the problem, as I used to see it too, was avarice. You can't get a borderline to engage in treatment in most cases if you're honest with them. If you really come across with, here's what the problems are, here's how we have to work on them, because basically what you have to do is appeal to their selfishness, to their self-interest, and to show them how modifying their behavior will ultimately reward them in more positive ways, by being less abusive, by being more in control of their emotions. But in order to do that, you have to be pretty frank about what the nature of their problems are. And in most cases with borderlines, the moment that you infer that anything is on them, they are absolutely gone. Now, I'll tell you a true story here. I used to know a practitioner, and this was a male, not a female, who made his living off of borderline females. and he made a damn good living off of borderline females. This is back in the days of pagers, and he used to give out his pager number, and he would tell each and every borderline patient that he could get his hand on, and it was 90% women or more, how special they were, how nobody else understood their problems the way he did, how abusive the people were in their lives, how they needed to understand her better, and would feed into all this pathology and hook them in. And this guy was straight up sociopath. He would talk about this in terms of fishing. He would make the motion with his hand, say, I'm throwing it out there, and saying, oh, you're really special, and then, oh, I got you now. And he had them coming around the street corner, lined up to get into his practice. His pager was going off every 3 or 4 minutes.
Like a drug dealer.
Yes, and he would make phone calls. Now, here's, settle down. I know that your husband's a jerk, blah, blah, blah. I know your kid's a little snot. They just don't understand you. Give them a pat on the head and a reassurance and hang up. But he was still billing for every hour that they came into therapy, and he had some of them coming in 2, 3, 4 times a week, some of them paying cash. This is how, sorry, folks, he is an extreme version of what happens in therapy now, but what's happening in therapy now is that borderlines are being engaged in mental health services and are being kept there with not much different techniques than this guy. He was just a lot more conscious about what he was doing. But most of what's happening now with a lot of borderlines in treatment is that their family members and their victims are being asked to enable and tolerate their abuse, and they're being told that it's not their fault, that it's something from their childhood. And that's why, and unfortunately also, and I don't want to forget this, this involves a lot of marriage and family therapists that are working along these lines. So when couples go looking for help, and God help the guy that's married to the borderline woman and gets the average LMFT for a therapist, because he's going to end up being blamed for her abuse. She's going to end up being enabled, and then they're going to have the therapeutic goal in that couple session of him learning to tolerate and deal with more abuse, and her learning to understand why it's not really her fault.
Well, there's that, and look, the BPD individual or person exhibiting traits of BPD doesn't even need to be identified and labeled as such, and most likely they will not be. I mean, we're talking about couples counseling where the husband is describing pretty abusive behaviors, and the therapist just sits there and doesn't really say much of anything, or will make. I've had clients tell me what has happened in some of their couples therapy sessions, where the therapist says, well, those are her feelings, and you need to validate and honor them. Now, I'm going to call bullshit on this, on the entire psychology profession that engages in this. Yep, people have feelings. Sometimes they're based on things that are occurring in reality. Sometimes they're not. And not every feeling is sacred just because you're having them, especially if it's not grounded in reality. And the job of a therapist is to help the client reality test that, especially when they're having feelings based on distorted or delusional interpretations of what is occurring in their lives and relationships, and then using those feelings to abuse the people who are closest to them, including their children.
Well, that is, again, I mean, this is all what it usually comes back to. Let me rephrase that. We have a crisis right now, I think, in the mental health industry because of feminist influence, and I think that it is. A part of it is that there is just the general human tendency, the human failings to rescue women, to saddle men with more responsibility than they should rightfully have in relationships, and that affects almost all therapists in one way or another. But we have a crisis in the mental health industry now that is actually producing more lack of mental health. That we've got people who are taking in borderlines and feeding into their pathology so that they can make a living from it, or because it fits their ideological worldview. Tara, I'd like to hear more about this thing that you mentioned earlier, because it was something I wasn't aware of, that was excluded from the DSM because of feminist politics. What was that again? Because I
It
wanted
was, I believe I believe I might be confusing it, or I might be confusing it with another disorder, or actually I think both disorders might have been removed from the DSM-4 at the insistence of the feminist, what is it, group 33? What's the feminist branch of APA in psychology? Oh, whatever their division is called.
Division 51.
Yes, I believe I'm remembering this accurately, but double check anybody who's interested. They lobby to have dependent personality disorder and passive aggressive personality disorder removed from the DSM because they claimed it unfairly stigmatized women, since women were the ones receiving those diagnoses most often.
Yeah, I remember something else too, about a crusade from them and some other feminist groups about removing multiple choice questions from college testing because it was unfairly discriminated against women by forcing them to pick a right answer. But that does not surprise me, nor did it surprise me when you talked about how feminists had said that sociopathy that is linked to borderline personality disorder can't rightly be called sociopathy.
Well, I don't know that those were feminist psychologists. That's written into the DSM. So whoever was responsible for that might not have been. In
the modern psychological world, I would think a lot of that probably is feminist influence. I'm just going to venture that as a guess. I can't think of another reason why they would do that. But the point is here really is, what are people to do? We have people that, and look, living with any mental disability is difficult. If you've ever lived with an alcoholic, or with somebody who's clinically depressed, or someone with schizophrenia, or someone that's bipolar, or, go down the list of diagnosis, it's tough. You do have a challenge in front of you to learn how to deal with any of these things if you want to maintain that relationship. But part of the problem with this, and I want to go back to it, is that we are talking about a problem of character, not a mental disease. There is a big difference between true clinical depression and somebody who's pissed off because they didn't get their way 28 out of 28 times during the course of a week. So what are people to do now? And how do we help borderlines? That's the question I want to ask you, is if we've got an establishment, a psychology establishment, that is only willing to tell borderlines that they're not the problem and that they're not responsible for their behavior or what they do to people, then aren't we just throwing them all under the bus?
I think to a certain extent, and look, not all therapists who treat borderlines are like that. I think there are some really talented, good clinicians out there who know what they're doing, who are going to offer their borderline clients empathy while holding them accountable for their actions and behaviors. But there are many who don't. There are support websites for individuals who are married to or related to or dealing with some significant other in their life who has a disorder out there, that, in my opinion, frankly, can be quite dangerous in that that they justify and rationalize and excuse the abusive behaviors of the borderline personality disorder and encourage the individuals being abused by them to be more supportive and understanding and practice something called radical acceptance. Now, I've read about radical acceptance, and I think the way it was intended to be used is something quite different than from what's happening now, which is you must radically accept that the individual with BPD has a problem, they can't control it, they can't help it, And if you're going to stay in the relationship, you need to be loving and supportive and empathetic. You know, I believe radical acceptance is something that springs from Buddhism. But I think for the individual who is, say, married to a BPD, radical acceptance means truly accepting you didn't break this person, you can't love this person well, and if you're going to stay with this person, you need to accept that many of these behaviors, these abuses, are not likely to change. And if you're okay with that, or want to put up with that, then stay in it. If you're not, then you have some tough decisions to make. But it gets twisted around to mean that you must accept the borderline and all of his or her pathology and their abuses. And I think that's just downright enabling behavior. I think they are enabling abuse. The other issue I have with many of these websites is that they serve a dual purpose of supporting individuals with BPD and the people who are being abused by them. You know, you can't serve two masters. So if you read these websites such as this, you'll see the individuals with BPD will attack people who say anything critical about their loved one with BPD, and it becomes an echo chamber. And I think it's really dangerous. And in fact, we chose today's topic because I received an email from a gentleman. Do you mind if I read it, Paul? It's not too very long. So I received an email from somebody who stumbled across my website. Hello, first of all, I want to say a massive thank you for your site and all that you've done. Blah, blah, blah. Nice things about me. We don't need to get into that. I am a man raised by a narcissistic mother who went on to spend 3 years of my life with a borderline personality disordered woman who is thankfully my ex. The relationship with that woman tore my heart out, and it has taken me a long time to recover, in part because I did not know or understand what was happening until I started reading websites like yours. What worries me is that a lot of websites about BPD seem more concerned with not offending those who suffer from BPD than helping their victims. Rather than screaming, "Get out," when people ask for advice, they instead go on and on about the feelings of the BPD abuser and excuse their behavior by saying it's not their fault and that they don't know what they're doing. On these websites, all but the mildest criticism of BPD people are forbidden. Putting the concerns of BPD people above their partners or families seems to be a growing trend on many mental health websites, and one that leaves me worried, as it may prevent the people who really need help from getting it or the advice they need. It was only once I understood what I had been through that I could begin putting my life back together. Is this something you have noticed? Yes. Can anything be done? Or is it perhaps inevitable given the nature of BPD and their fear of rejection and criticism?
That's an excellent email. I want to go back for a second to something else you were talking about just before you read it, and this is just a personal opinion. Take it or leave it for whatever it's worth. But if you look at a relationship that is marked by your constant abuse and the emotional ability of your partner and constantly being attacked and not knowing what's coming around the corner next, what's going to hit you next every 5 minutes from their mood swings, if that is okay with you, it is my personal opinion that there is something deeply, deeply wrong with you that you need to seek help for and to find out why that you're willing to take such abuse.
People who are healthy, you know, relatively mentally healthy, who have healthy self-esteem and self-respect, do not tolerate these kinds of behaviors from the people who claim to love them. You just don't.
I want to make a recommendation here too, and for whatever it's worth. Part of the problem, as we've been identifying, is that there is a very much a shortage in the mental health community of people that have the intelligence and the skills and the willingness to take on things like personality disorders and actually try to help these people rather because it is much easier to enable them than it is to help them. Helping them requires a lot of skill, a lot of intelligence, a lot of sophistication in how you approach
an incredibly thick skin, because when you hold them accountable, the BPD individual will lash out and abuse their therapist just like they would their husband or boyfriend or child or parent.
Exactly. And now let's say that you're a guy that stumbles on this video and you have a partner whom you suspect may be borderline or have borderline traits, or is that all this behavior is sounding familiar to you. And a lot of times what these people will do is they will insist on getting therapy with having it in mind that the therapist is going to collude with them in order to attack you, and they're often right. So here, I just want to make one suggestion that you can do. If you feel pressured to go into marital therapy as a guy, and you've decided that you're going to give in to that, and you're going to go see a marriage counselor, go pick the counselor yourself and see them yourself the first time. And this is not to go in to tell them what a bad wife you have or what a bad partner, or to try to do what the borderline would do, which is to get them to collude with you. But you really do, before you get into a marriage counseling situation, if you have a personality disordered partner, you need to know what you're dealing with on the other side of the chair in the therapist.
That's right.
Need to ask them very pointed questions about their knowledge of borderline personalities, of personality disorders, and about how people should react to that. And if you hear a hint of enabling, if you hear a hint of them being hesitant to talk about your having boundaries that aren't supposed to be crossed, and that you're supposed to protect yourself in a relationship or leave it, then you're in the wrong place. Whatever you spent on that session was pennies on the dollar compared to what you'll spend ending up with a therapist that's going to set up to play your wife's advocate in a couple session that is really for her benefit as a personality disorder.
And to that screening criteria, I would also throw in, ask the therapist flat out, do you believe women are capable of abusing their husbands and boyfriends? Do you believe men can be abuse victims too? And if you get, well, yes, but only in very rare situations,
run.
Go find yourself somebody else. If they give you a rasher of crap about, well, what do you know about personality disorders? Are you a psychiatrist? Are you a social worker? Are you a mental health expert? Just get out of their office. You know what? This is the digital age. If you've been living with someone for 10 years and you have half a brain and are paying attention, it's not rocket science to type in to a search engine the symptoms and behaviors you've been observing and experiencing and get an understanding on what might be the problem. No, you're not qualified to make an official diagnosis, but you certainly are qualified to understand what you have experienced firsthand. So if you find yourself in front of a therapist who has that attitude, keep looking. One more thing. I had a client who was dating a female graduate student in psychology, and he had false allegations against him. Told this woman he was dating that he suspected that his ex had BPD, and she said, "Well, then you need to feel sorry for her." Meanwhile, he almost went to jail for stuff that didn't happen. And this future psychologist was telling this man that no, he wasn't the victim, even though he almost went to jail, lost his career, had to pay tens of thousands of dollars in fees to an attorney to straighten out this mess. No, he needed to feel sorry for her. And then she said, and this is the grubby little fingerprints of feminism in the field of psychology. She went on to say, and anyway, when a woman is having problems like that and behaving like that, most of the time it can be traced back to something a man did to her.
There's your signal to run right there. And let's say we need to say this and qualify it. Guys, if your partner who is telling you that we need to go to therapy to get our problems sorted out, which is code speak where we need to drag you in to somebody that will help me bully you into acting like I want you to. Mm-hmm. If they are exhibiting behaviors that are very consistent with the things that we're talking about, making false accusations, destroying property, self-mutilating, making threats of suicide to get their way, saying, what do you mean you have to check the mail? Why can't I go with you? If it is that bad in your relationship, guys, you do not need a therapist. You need an attorney.
If you're married. if you're married.
And then maybe even if you're not, if you're living with somebody. But
sometimes you need the jaws of life to extract someone like that out of your home or apartment.
And the other thing you need is a car, which you can get in and throw your bags in and drive away. We are talking about a very thin line here. When you're at the point, usually, I mean, a marriage therapist will tell you this all the time, because this is how they explain their failures in therapy, is to say that people wait too late. They wait until there's too many problems. Well, of course they wait till there's fucking problems. Why would they go to a therapist if they weren't having problems? But that little sales pitch for family therapy and that little bit of excusing their failure to perform in that aside. If you are really dealing with somebody who is characterologically, say that fast 3 times, a mess, and who has really bad character, is really destructive to you and harming your life, you're wasting your time with a therapist. Don't go see a therapist. Maybe see one for you. If you can't figure out why you're not already fucking gone, then go see a therapist about that and talk to them and find one that really cares that men can be abuse victims too. But you really don't need a therapist in most of these cases. What you need is out. And you know, with all, again, I understand people with borderline personality disorder suffer. Folks, they hurt so much sometimes they self-mutilate to control pain, and to get attention, and they're out of control. And no, there is a certain amount of truth to the fact nobody asked to be this way. Nobody wants to have a borderline personality disorder, and they are people that are deeply affected by their problems, but they have at least the ability to get help from qualified help where people aren't enabling them. And the fact of the matter is that their victims suffer more than they do. One borderline can be compared to what any other serial abuser does in any way. They can be a wrecking ball through the lives of one person after another, after another, after another, their whole lives, causing all sorts of destruction.
And not just their partners. This happened. They will abuse their children, and the transmission of abuse occurs in yet another generation, which is another good reason to look at your girlfriend or fiance's parents and family dynamic, because often this happens generation after generation after generation unless something is done to break that cycle.
You know, Dr. T brought up something before we started this program today that I think is also really important. As you know, she read a partial list of criteria about borderline personality disorder. Like I said, go in and Google borderline personality disorder, read up on it. If you think becoming an expert in the disorder is going to help you, then fine, go ahead and do that. I would argue that it's not, that you should just look at behaviors. But one of the things she added to the list is if your girlfriend shot her last boyfriend. There's a real sign, guys. And I know she had a really good reason for it. But if she shot him or stabbed him or ran him over with a car or hit him in the head with a pipe wrench or squirted lighter fluid on his crotch and set it on fire. All of these things I'm thinking of came from news stories, by the way. I'm not just making them up as they go along, as I go along here. But if she did one of those things to her last boyfriend, you might want to consider that the only diagnostic criteria that you need to meet.
Or if she has a room wallpapered with restraining orders that she obtained against ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands, make like the Roadrunner and meep meep, get out.
Which, of course, brings us right up against the same wall we run into every time, and I think that's probably good enough to have, some of our closing thoughts aim in this direction. Mm-hmm. Is the biggest enablers of borderlines are often their victims.
Yes.
Men who tolerate abuse, men who will try to do anything to please them until they blow up and become abusers themselves. That's often the cycle, in many, much of male violence. And there was a sportscaster, I can't remember his name, from ESPN recently that was suspended.
Smith.
Yeah, because he made the inference that women can provoke and abuse their way into volatile situations in relationships, and he advised not to do that. So, of course, he was suspended immediately, although what he said was absolutely 100% spot on correct.
That's correct.
You can emotionally abuse somebody to the point that they react physically. Anybody that does not believe that or think that it can happen, you're out of your minds. No. Am I justifying violence? No, I'm not justifying violence. Am I justifying violence against women? No, I'm not justifying violence against women. What I'm telling you, or men, what I'm telling you is that if you spend every day for years belittling and emotionally terrorizing somebody, if you put any dog in a corner long enough and kick it, it will eventually come out and bite the living shit out of you. And that is a natural consequence of constant abuse on somebody. Mm-hmm. So we know how bad things are in this society when a sportscaster gets suspended from his job for telling the truth about what can lead to physical abuse in relationships. Imagine how bad it is in some psychotherapy sessions going on right now.
Well, cherry pickers, get ready. I'm about to give you a juicy one. Oftentimes, when you're dealing with someone with borderline personality disorder, they want to play the victim, and they will deliberately provoke and abuse, because I'm not saying they want to get hit or beat up, but they oftentimes behave the way they do because they want to elicit an emotional response from their target, like anger, rage, and sometimes physical violence. And then once they do, the hours or days or weeks of intense emotional and sometimes physical abuse that they themselves have perpetrated are washed away as if they never existed, and it's, you're a monster, how could you tell me, shut the fuck up, how could you call me a bitch? You are the one with the anger problem. How did you hit me? You're an abuser.
And the typical guy's reaction in that situation, who gets caught in that cycle, is to spiral deeply into shame and to hang his head down and become a puppy that will take anything for a long, long time, and it will be coming to him, because that's exactly her reason for making this happen, is so that she can control him. And that he will take more abuse, and then it will build up again, and he will explode again, and then she will be right back in total control of everything, because he does not figure out that he's being pushed and abused. Oh, it seems Dr. T has a phone call.
Call from cell phone TA.
Oh, geez. I don't know how to mute this. I'm sorry. Hold on. Hanging up on you, I will call you back. I really need how to learn how to work my office equipment. I don't know how.
Young Turk, we are not.
No.
But not yet.
No.
We're working on it, folks.
No.
Want to let everybody know in the low bar we have started a new Google group for A Voice for Men, and there is a link in the low bar to this video, and it is filling already very quickly with people that want to participate in that community. So we'll hope you click on that and join us.
And I'll start one for Shrink for Men just as soon as I can figure out how to do it.
Yeah, we'll show her how to. Don't worry, the guys will show her how to do it.
I'm not damseling. I really don't know. I'm sure I can figure it out. I'll do a Google search for directions.
Have to be honest, I did not do it. Somebody else had to do it for me because I am technically.
So you were damseling.
Yes, I'm damseling, and I'm going to damsel and advertise for what we'll try to do once we get Dr. T's community built in Google. We will put links in each Hangout to that, and we'll be scheduling events like this through there and other videos and the upcoming conference information. We're going to start packaging all this into one little nice tidy place where you can get the most relevant stuff on what's happening in the world of men and in trying to help them, which I happen to think is a very, very important and under-addressed problem. Dr. T, how about any final thoughts from you about therapists and their treatment or lack thereof of people with personality disorders and the people who are their victims?
Sure. If you find yourself with a therapist because you are in a relationship with somebody who is abusing you, whether or not she has a mental health diagnosis, I think it doesn't matter ultimately, because you know what, having that diagnostic label does not justify or excuse the abuse. It really doesn't. It doesn't. It just means that the odds of that person changing are infinitesimal. So if you find yourself with a therapist or on a support site where the therapist, instead of helping you try to figure out why you're staying in such an awful relationship, even though I know they do have good qualities and you really, really love her, but if that therapist isn't helping you to identify and understand why you are willingly staying in a situation that is so toxic and so destructive to you, your psyche, your soul, your heart, your body, your career, your other relationships, then you need to find a different therapist, especially if that therapist is advising you on coping strategies to stay in the relationship and be better able to tolerate the abuse, which is often what goes on. So please consider that. And the same thing goes for support websites, where they're admonishing you for not being understanding enough of your abuser. Just find yourself another. I mean, there are plenty of websites. There's Shrink for Men. There's A Voice for Men. There's outofthefog.net. I don't know if they have a forum, but find yourself one where the support is actually directed to the targets of abuse and not the abusers, whatever their mental health issues may be. The other thing I want to add is that something Paul said and that was mentioned in the comments that I'm tracking, you know, I think a lot of men do get sucked into these relationships because they are protective of women. Because oftentimes somebody who has this type of mental health issue will present as a damsel in distress, somebody who's been so beaten up and mistreated by life, and your heart melts and you want to help and protect this person. And then some time passes and you realize that the delicate flower is actually a Venus flytrap and she's about to bite your face off. Pity is not a good basis for a relationship. And if somebody initially in a relationship in the dating stages, getting to know you stages, is eliciting feelings of pity and sympathy from you, be very careful. Be very careful, because I've seen it happen time and again. Women with these issues and men, male borderlines, often do the same thing. They are eliciting your sympathy and pity so that you will feel sorry for them, which means you are more likely to tolerate their abuse because, hey, they've had it so rough and they can't help it. So be very careful about that. Slightly off topic, but I wanted to add it. I think that's all I have to say.
No, I think that's absolutely on topic because again, and I try to say this every week.
And that's how they manipulate therapists too.
Yep. Try to say this all the time. An ounce of prevention, guys, is there for
an ounce of prevention saves a lot in court costs later on.
Yes, it does, and it can save in your freedom and a lot of other things. But I want to go back for a moment to something Dr. T just said because I want to stress it some more. When you meet a woman and are getting to know her in the very early stages, like the first couple of dates, outings, whatever you want to call them, and you end up feeling the need to protect her, and I don't care what she's saying, but if you end up feeling that way, if that instinct is triggered in you that, wow, boy, she's had it rough, she's had it bad, I would never treat her that way, and if you start having those kind of thoughts within the first couple of meetings, that's a red flag, guys. That's a big, huge red flag. Healthy women do not present that way. And of course, part of the problem here is not just men's protective instincts, it's their pattern in mate selection, because what men most often do is they have an immediate physical reaction to a woman, and if it's positive and they're attracted, then they start trying to create reasons in their head why they like her. This is part of normal human behavior, is that you see her, oh, she has a nice body, she has a pretty face, I think she looks really sexy, oh, well, let me just get to know her a little bit, and everything you hear sounds positive. During that time is when he is going to introduce the damsel in. And it may be very blatant, it may be saying my ex-husband is still stalking me, and it may be very subtle by saying I had a really rough time as a kid. But if you end up during that time feeling your white knight instincts being triggered for that woman, buddy, you're in danger. I'm not kidding you. You're in danger right then and there. And if you don't know that, or if you let your desire for her physically override that, then you're walking into your own problems. And until men start taking responsibility for that, then telling them about the evils of BPD and bad therapy and the family courts, all of it means nothing. All of this goes back to the individual male, to his reaction to women, to whether or not he tests her character, to whether or not he even values whether she has character. And let's face it, that is a lot of men's problem. Once they're physically attracted, they don't give a damn what her character is like. This happens all the time. It's been reduced to saying thinking with your dick. I think it's still a fair analogy. It is thinking with your instinct to reproduce and not thinking with your brain.
Or thinking with your family of origin issues and hoping to get an emotionally corrective experience with somebody who's just as damaged and fucked up as either of your parents who did the original damage. Not going to happen.
But either way, it was bad enough 50 years ago. But in today's world, this is more dangerous than it has ever been before. You can end up in jail, you can end up dead, you can end up broke, you can end up on the street, living in your car, or not even having a car to live in. It happens all the time. And it all goes back to the beginning on whether or not men are having standards about the women they choose to associate with. And if you don't change that, then you're a victim. Dr. T, anything else?
No.
Okay, with that, I want to thank everybody. Remind you again that there's a link in the low bar to the new ABFM Google group. If you think you are in or might be in an abusive relationship, please go visit shrinkformen.com. That's shrink, the number 4, men.com.
It's on the bottom of my little name, lower third, whatever that thing is called.
Right here.
Right here, yes.
They say you're supposed to just say this shit endlessly, and eventually people click on, because I want to tell you what.
Thank you for being a self-promoter than I am, because I suck at it.
Absolutely. But if you haven't read Dr. T's stuff, you really ought to. If you want to understand what goes on in relationships where you stand to be the vulnerable one, buddy, go read that website. If you want to understand other issues that affect men and boys generally, as always, please come visit avoiceformen.com. And we look forward to very soon announcing ICMI 15, the International Conference on Men's Issues for 2015. It will be our second conference, and we will be coming up with details about that soon. We want to wish everybody a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.